Welcome back. Today I'd like to continue my series on Spectator tutorials for Starcraft II. Today I want to look at Zerg units. Now you can ignore my UI because I'm using a map that allows me to just spawn units and actually just make my own base and all that stuff without any interference from another player or the computer. But what I want to do is show you each of the Zerg units, kind of what their roles are, give you an idea of how they play. I find Zerg to be the most confusing if you're a new player because when you look at them, all the units look kind of similar. They're all insect-like, they're all kind of slimy and gross, right? And so if you're not familiar with the Zerg, it may be confusing when you see them in a battlefield as to what they do. It's not as clear-cut. You know, when you see a Terran player and you see a tank, you know that a tank shoots off a mortar shell. You know, that sort of thing. So, that said, let's take a quick look. I'm going to start off with the Zerg drone, which is much like the Protoss probe and the human SCV with a few notable differences. It can build buildings, it can mine. I can show you it mines, and you can see my base here. Let's see the base is a little cleaner. This base right here, you can see the drones are mining the minerals and they're mining the gas, just like the other two races. Now, the notable differences between the drone and the probe and the SCV are that the drone, when it builds a building, will become that building. I'm not going to show it here, but when they build a building, they will actually become that building, and the drone will effectively go away and become the building, essentially. So, you know, they can build all the buildings, but they just become it. So, with Terran, of course, the SCV just continues to build, and with Protoss, the probe actually can leave while the building is warping in. The other thing that drones are good at is that they, well, you know what, I take that back. No, they can burrow once you get the evolution to burrow, which is nice because you can, when you're getting attacked, you can then hide your drones when they're being burrowed. So, other than that, they're not that much different than the other races. They can only build buildings on creep, and I'll show you here. Creep is this kind of grayish liquid stuff that's coming out from the bases of the Zerg. So, they can only build buildings on that creep. And all Zerg units move faster on that creep, so that's kind of something to keep in mind. Let's look at the second unit that's typically built for the Zerg, and that is the Zergling. Put this drone back. And it's the cheapest unit in the game. It's also one of the fastest ground units once it's been evolved. So I've evolved these Zerglings to be very fast. So they're at fast speed, and they're great for harassing an opponent. They're great for early rushes, but like the Zealot and the Marine, they're also very important late game. So not only are they a good early game unit, but they're also a good late game. Mid game, they become a little less potent. And then one powerful thing that they can do is that they can morph into a baneling. And you can see this one is doing it right here. I'll move these guys out of the way while he's morphing. Now, a baneling is, actually, you know what? I'm going to use these guys to show you kind of what a baneling can do. A baneling is an upgraded Zergling that he moves very quickly when you upgrade him. That will explode on contact with its enemy. So let's take a look here. Let's see if I can do it against. Let's see. Can we do it? Boom! It exploded. So now I didn't get to show you what it would have done. I'm trying to. It's hard to attack your own units, but I could have had that baneling blow up. It would have destroyed all three of these Zerglings. It's a very, very potent attack. Of course, it destroys the units when it does it. So I'll morph the rest of these. Why not? Okay, so that's the Zergling. Let's go on to the next unit that has become more popular as of late because Blizzard has increased its ranged attack, and that is the Queen. Now the Queen has multiple purposes. It moves very slow off the creep, so you really want to keep it on the creep as much as possible. You'll see players use it as an early defense mechanism. It can shoot air and ground units, so it's good at that. It can expand your creep, so you can put a creep tumor. It can throw down a creep tumor, and when that creep tumor is down, it actually will expand the creep. This is useful for players to combine their bases with creep. It also has the ability to spawn larvae, so if you click on your hatchery, it will spew up onto the hatchery, and it will actually create more larvae for that Zerg player, allowing them to build more units simultaneously, which is a very useful trait. So, you know, they can also transfuse, which restores 225 life to target biological units or structures. So they can do some kind of healing thing if you want them to do that. Especially good late game when you want to keep your buildings alive and that sort of thing. So you can see the spawn larva is almost done here. And boom, what'll happen, look at all the larvae that popped out. It's very useful because now I can go here and I can pick my larva and I can build a ton of Zerglings. So I don't have enough Overlords to do that, but you basically get the picture. And look how much this creep has expanded while I was talking about that. Very neat. So let's go on to the third unit that I want to talk about, and that is the Hydralisk. It is not as often used in modern day games because it's relatively weak. It doesn't have very much life, and it can attack air and ground units, but it's just so weak that it makes it very difficult to keep alive. Now it's used, you know, commonly when there's a large air force coming from another player, but it's not as popular of a unit as it was in the original StarCraft game. But that's what it looks like. Very popular looking creature, very, you know, iconic, I guess, of StarCraft in general. Let's see if I can blow it up with these guys. I don't know if I can. This is explode. Let's put him right next to it and do it. Boom! It didn't hurt him because he's mine, I guess. So anyway, so that's the Hydralisk. You know, useful unit. I wouldn't say that it's very popularly used, but it still has its uses in certain games. Now the Roach is one of the more popular units in the game nowadays, and I will show it this. It is a unit that can only attack other ground units, but it is very powerful. It can also burrow once you've evolved burrow, and maybe I should do that, and I can show it to you once it gets it, which allows it to hide from other units, and that is used frequently. They will burrow their entire Roach army to and they heal up when they're burrowed, so that's kind of nice. So these are very, very powerful units. A lot of Zerg players will mass Roaches a lot of times, especially against Protoss players, although if Protoss players start to build Immortals, then the Roaches become a little less important because Immortals can just tear through Roaches. However, they're still a good unit, and one thing a lot of people will say about them is that they're not very cost effective. They're not a good unit in terms of cost effectiveness, but they are so powerful that in large numbers it's sometimes worth it to mass them. So something to keep in mind. You'll see this unit used very often in most games with the Zerg players. Now I skipped over the Overlord, but I'll bring him into the fray here. The Overlord is basically the supply unit of the Zerg army. So like the pylons and the supply depots, the Overlord serves the same purpose. It gives that player another 8 supply to build more of their army. And it can also morph to an Overseer, and I'll do that in a second. But the other thing it does is it's good for spying. You know, they use it. A lot of times they'll float it around, especially since they've now increased the speed of it. Blizzard has just recently. It is used more often as a kind of an observer. It can detect, or it's not a detector, but it can easily keep an eye on the map because it can float anywhere it needs to float. So Zerg players will often move it close to the enemy's base so they can see what's kind of going on. It can generate creep, which sometimes is good for just blocking other players from building their buildings because they can't build buildings on creep. So you can see he's kind of just puking up a bunch of creep. So it's kind of the Zerg puke, I guess. So you can see it's just falling out of him. And then the next thing is to morph to Overseer. And he's going to morph pretty quickly here, and I'll show you what an Overseer does. Now an Overseer can make changelings, which I'll show you what it does. Boop, pops down. That changeling will look like an enemy unit. So now, as you can see, he's a detector unit as well, the Overseer, so he can actually see cloaked units. Now, I don't think I can do it because I don't have an enemy here, but whenever the enemy is close, that changeling will actually take on one of the units. See, it says here, changeling first encounters an enemy unit, will match the unit's color and change into a Zealot, Marine, or Zergling, depending on the enemy race. So, kind of neat to do some spying. You can put down a changeling and kind of mingle with the enemy's army. You can contaminate it. Buildings, which prevents them from doing their upgrades for up to 30 seconds, I believe. Yeah. So, kind of a neat unit. Moves faster than the Overlord and has kind of the same function and a few extra functions. So, kind of a neat unit. You may see only 1 or 2 of those in the actual game. You can see this changeling's kind of frothing and gross. Okay, so we'll move him back out of the way. Let's go on to, well, let's stay with the ground units for now. The Infestor is a higher level unit that you'll see employed on the field. It can throw out an infested Terran, which is basically a Marine type unit that can you know, you can control it for a short period of time. You can see the bar here is kind of going down. A lot of times you'll have a mass of them, and they can throw out a ton of infested Terrans. They also do fungal growth, which will allow you to essentially, you can't see it here because it's my own units, but it will immobilizes the unit and it causes damage. It's almost like a poison type snare. And then neural parasite, which allows them to control whatever unit, and I can't do that either. But the neat part about that is you can actually mind control, especially if the other player has a very large unit like a Colossus or something powerful. It can actually neural parasite that unit and take over it, so they can actually use it for their own. Kind of neat. So let me throw out a bunch of infested Terrans to get you an idea. So he can have his own little army of Marines, at least temporarily, and they can. And watch, I'll have them attack their own infestor. See? Well, oh no. So kind of just neat skill that they have. And if you get a lot of infestors, you can just imagine if each one can make, you know, 5 or 6 Terran, then you've got quite an army of Terran for that 30 seconds. So it can be a game changer in many cases. They all fell over dead. Okay. Well, let's go on to some of the other air units. The Mutalisk is a common unit used, and it really is used by Zerg players who are very confident in their micro skills, and by that I mean the ability to control their armies. Because if you build Mutalisks, you really have to use them as harassment. You know, you take them into the enemy base, try to destroy their probes, their SCVs, or their Zerglings, or I mean their drones. And it really is used as kind of a harassment tool. So you get a number of these, and you can really hamper somebody's ability to produce and have an economy when you can do these hit-and-run attacks with Mutalisks. So you'll see them often used in hit-and-run type scenarios. Other than that, they have an attack that ricochets off a number of units. Let's see if he'll do it here. Yeah. So he's attacking, and they don't do a whole lot of damage, but they will take out probes and drones relatively quickly. So a good thing to do to harass. And as I said, you need to really know how to control your army and have those micro skills to make it effective. So you'll see really good Zerg players not only controlling their economy and their other units, but also harassing with these Mutalisks. So kind of neat unit. The next flying unit is the Corruptor. And the Corruptor is essentially, I mean, it has a little bit of attack, not a whole lot, but they also allow you to corrupt units, obviously. That's one of their things. And then the main thing that people do with them is they morph them to Broodlords. And Broodlords are a very, very powerful, very expensive air unit. And so the Corruptors aren't typically used as much as an attack unit. They're only really used as a bridge between not having Broodlords and having Broodlords. So let's move on to the Broodlord so I can give you an idea of what that's like. Broodlord is a very, very powerful air-to-ground unit. So it can really take out ground armies quickly. And I'll show you here. Attack these guys. When you have multiple Broodlords, you can see he's taking out this roach at rapid speed. If you have 8 or 9 Broodlords, you will rule the battlefield, and many Zerg, that is their goal, is to have a Broodlord army. You can see he's just wiping out my units. Just one of these. He sends out these little tiny Broodlord thingies, and they it's called swarm seeds, and they do their damage. So really nice unit. Now here's the in-game melee unit. It's the ultralisk. Very high hit points, very high damage, immune to a lot of things. It can also burrow, and here's the burrow skill that finally got trained. You don't see this as often either, but a couple of these guys can really wreak havoc on a battlefield. They can also take down buildings very, very quickly, and that's primarily what they're used for. You don't see them as much as the Broodlords perhaps in professional games, but they still have their uses. So you can just see it's just a massive unit. It's really just like a Colossus except at melee range. So let me think here. I think I've covered every unit. I'm not sure. I believe I have. Let's take a look. Got the Zerglings here, and of course they can burrow now. That's neat. The Queen. We talked about the Queen. I think I've covered it all. So I hope that was informative. I just wanted to give you guys a brief overview of the units. Like I said, it's not something that I wanted to go too in-depth with their scenarios and everything, but I wanted people to understand what each unit does. You get the little harassment Mutalisks, the powerful air-to-ground Broodlords, you know, the Corruptors, which are kind of like a bridge between, you know, Mutalisks and Broodlords. You get your Overseers, which is upgraded Overlord, ultralisks, Zerglings, Hydralisks. I just hope that you get an idea of what these units can do. That way when you see them in a match play or in whatever you're watching for StarCraft 2, you're not confused as to, well, what the heck does that do? And you have a basic idea. So I hope I've helped. Check back in with CerealSnax as often as you can. Please subscribe. I hope you enjoy my channel, and I will talk to you next time.